Hello and welcome to the DUT22 Formula Student Team Delft design presentation. My name is Anton Deacon. I'm the team manager of the Formula Student Team Delft for the coming year. And together with Sam Pynenberg, my colleague and our chief engineer, we are going to present to you the fruits of our labor over the past 5 months. Our schedule for the afternoon goes something like this. We're going to explain exactly what Formula Student is by going back through the history of Formula Student and how Formula Student Team Delft fits in to the Formula Student universe. Then we'll reveal the actual design for the 2022 season, and finally we'll explain why exactly we want to win. Before we get into it, I want to give a big thanks to the TU Delft for allowing us to bring students to the live design presentation, who, if you're watching online, I'm sure you'll hear occasionally throughout the presentation. But let's jump into it. Starting over 40 years ago, in explaining what is Formula Student, we've got to start at the beginning. Over 40 years ago, in 1981, in Texas, in the United States of America, at the University of Texas in Austin, a group of professors felt that their engineering students were finishing their degrees and entering the workforce lacking practical experience with real engineering challenges, having to actually deliver a physical product to the marketplace. And so they came up with a fun competition, a racing event, where teams from different universities would create a car that they would, in the space of 1 year, designing it and building it, start to finish, and they would take it to a racetrack and compete against other teams. And there were 6 main categories that they would compete in. The dynamic events, one category of categories, where the car would actually be running. And that was broken down into an acceleration event, a maneuverability event, an endurance event, and a fuel economy event. The static events at the time, which was things that were required to deliver a product without the car actually moving, were a rudimentary design report, so where judges would, or 1 or 2 industry experts, would ask the engineers, why exactly did you design your suspension like this? And the engineers would get an opportunity to tell the cool things about their car. And the other part was an aesthetics prize, which car looked the best. But by 1985, it had really become clear that engineering, in the real world at least, isn't only about the mathematics behind the car and figuring out how to operate a lathe. You need to be able to get your resources in a way well-structured enough to know that you're going to have enough to complete your car. So a cost report was added. And this was the first concrete move from the competition being purely design-focused to the multidisciplinary event that we see today. By 1986, 5 years' worth of alumni had come and gone through the Formula Student competition, and it entered the workforce. And the large automotive manufacturers in the US had started to take notice of these extremely high-quality engineers that the competition was producing. And so in 1986, the Volkswagen of America sponsored a prize of $1,000 to the competition in the US that year. The competition continued to grow for 11 more years, and in 1997, the Europeans finally took notice. And a small team, a starting team at least, from the UK in Leeds, went over to the US to compete for the first time. The first small step to the competition becoming truly international. And 1 year later, the competition was brought to the UK, and a round of the Formula Student competition was brought to the United Kingdom, making a concrete step for the competition becoming international. By this stage, the competition looked like what we know it today to be. The exact structure of the competition had been figured out, and the basic system of how cars would be judged and how teams would be judged had all been defined, which we still use today. And it works like this. You're competing for 1,000 points. Instead of just competing for time like you do in Formula 1, because of the static events, they break everything down into points. 2 main categories, statics and dynamics, one where the car doesn't move, one where the car does move. The relation of those two is the statics make up about 1/3 of all the points and the dynamics make up 2/3. So it's still mostly about getting a car that moves. But in the static events, there's 3 parts to it. First is the engineering design, which has come a long way since 1981 at least. Now there will be a panel of 10 industry experts who ask the experts on each team about their specific field, whether it be in powertrain or electronics. And these experts, they really know a lot. So when they're asking why, they actually know the correct answer to those questions. So you really have to know what you're saying to be able to maximize the points. Every mistake that you make, you lose points. And if they get the feeling that you've guessed and ended up at the car that you have in front of you, you're going to lose points and you're not going to win. You need to understand all of the physics behind the vehicle that you've created in order to come first. The next static event is the cost in manufacturing. This is an ancestor of the cost report. Now included is the manufacturing costs. They'll go right down to the lathe in your workshop and the amount of electricity that lathe uses to create one bolt that you put on your car. If you can't tell them how much electricity it uses, you lose points and you're not going to win. And finally, in the static events, we have the business plan presentation. This is a real opportunity for the teams to get creative. They have to come up with a company surrounding the car. It can be quite loosely related to the car, but it has to be a concrete company with a proper business proposition, all of the finances worked out, and you pitch this company in a business plan presentation for 10 minutes to a panel of hypothetical venture capitalists asking for an investment to kick the company off, to start the company and make it a real thing. And then on to the dynamic events, where the car is actually moving. Acceleration still exists, but now it's been very clearly defined. It is a 75-meter sprint from a standing start. And by 2015, we're jumping a little bit into the future now, but by 2015, this is how quickly acceleration happened. Start and across the line. It's about 3.5 seconds to cover 75 meters. As for the next dynamic event is the skid pad event. The real advantage of this event is, especially the more mathematically oriented engineers, get a steady state in which to examine the performance of the car. So if we show you some footage, again from 2015, they wet the track just to make it more interesting. And you'll see the car is going quick, but it's not speeding up and slowing down. The driver is trying to find the optimal position to put the pedal at, to find the exact limit of grip, and because the corner radius isn't changing, he can hold it right there, which means you can literally calculate, theoretically, how quickly the car will do a skid pad on the back of with a pen and a piece of paper. Now we start getting to the dynamic events that we'll be more familiar with, especially if you're a fan of motorsports. The first is the autocross, and this is similar to qualifying. The catch is that in qualifying in Formula One or in NASCAR, you get practice. You get hours of practice before your run. For us, the closest thing that the drivers get to practice is you'll have 2 drivers for the autocross. Each of them will get 2 runs, but before they actually do that, they get to walk the track for about 20 minutes. So they've got to make a 3D image in their own mind, remember where the braking points will be, having never seen it, and then get in the car and try to do this. That is just over 1 kilometer in 55.39 seconds around a track with more than 50 corners on it. I've seen this video more than 100 times, and it still surprises me how quickly they go. This was the first run on the day in Formula Student Austria back in 2019 at the Red Bull Ring. The second driver reviewed this footage, got in the car, and beat that time by a full second. So that's the autocross event. Finally is the endurance event. This event is worth as many points as all the static events put together. It's included with the efficiency, and just like it used to be back in 1981. It's essentially the track that we've just seen with some minor modifications to allow for overtaking, as you'll have up to 5 or 6 cars on the track at the same time. But it's the same track 20 times over to make for a 22-kilometer endurance with a mandatory driver change right in the middle after 11 kilometers. And this is, because it's the most difficult of the events, it defines a lot of how you design the car. You need to have a large accumulator in order to be able to finish this event. And then, of course, as Sam will explain, the car has to be reliable enough to do it. It might not sound that difficult, especially in comparison to something like Formula One, where it's 300 kilometers. But to start from nothing and design and build a car in 1 year to be able to finish this event, what we actually see at competitions is that only about 50% of the teams who start finish. So now we know what the competition is. This has been clearly defined since 1998. And in 1999, seeing the success of Formula Student UK the previous year, the TU Delft in the Netherlands took notice and decided to join in on the fun. And so we built the car that you see over there, the DUT1. It was a proof of concept. We were trying to figure out how to actually do this. So we founded Formula Student Team Delft, and there's a picture of the car in testing. And of course, even though we just wanted to compete, we just wanted to show up and actually get a car to the starting line, the TU Delft students, they weren't going to start with something relatively simple like a space frame, which is made out of steel tubes for their chassis. They went all out with a carbon fiber monocoque from day one, just like they use in Formula One. And they even put a massive wing on it, which you can see in that picture. It's so big, sometimes you don't notice it, but it's right above the main hoop over there. Of course, a large aerospace faculty not to be left out. But the car worked. It did what we needed it to do. It took 2 years, and the DUT01, DUT is for Delft University Team. We could take that title because we were the first dream team, as they called. It made it to the start and indeed the finish line of Formula Student UK in our very first outing. Over the next 5 years, the competition continued to grow and expand. And by 2006, Formula Student Germany was founded. Formula Student Germany, as you'll see in the next few minutes, would soon become the premium competition in the world. And its history and ours would become quite closely entwined. In 2008, we finally managed to win our first competition, after coming painfully close in 2006 with a third-place finish, and in 2007 with a second-place finish. We locked in the victory with this car, the DUT08. But a new dawn was rising on the automotive industry and the world in general as we moved towards sustainable vehicles. But just before we made that jump to electric, which had started in the previous year in 2009, we went out one last time with the DUT10, one of the most fondly remembered of all the cars we've made, and won Formula Student Germany with the car you see over there. And in 2011, we took the plunge, we went full electric, and there are many similarities between the design philosophy of the first car, the DUT1, and the first electric car, the DUT11. It was a simple approach, by today's standards at least, to electric cars. They essentially took the spot where the combustion engine used to go and put in 2 electric motors, which had a direct link to the rear wheels. And so it was a 2-wheel drive car with no aero, made as lightweight as possible. But we did it well enough to win Formula Student Germany on our very first outing in 2011. We continued to win. We won in 2012, and we won in 2013, by this stage putting on a full aerodynamics package as opposed to just one wing. Now, Formula Student Germany has a fun tradition where if you get a hat trick at their event, you get to keep this trophy. This trophy is absolutely one of a kind. No other electric team has one of these. The only other time you're going to see a trophy that looks like this is the one that FSG owns today to hand out to the victor of the electric competition. Our team carried on with many more successes for another 6 years, and now you can see the new trend that was picking up in Formula Student. They had seen the success of the 13 car, and so everyone was getting in on aerodynamics, and as a result, our aerodynamics package grew more and more. As you can see, this is so much more pronounced and so much bigger than it was on the 13 car. In 2017, the Formula Student Netherlands had been founded. Again, more expansion of the competition, and we finally made it out there to compete in 2019, victoriously. We managed to bring home our first home victory. That's a picture of the DUT19 competing at the skid pad in that year, another wet skid pad, setting a world record for the wet skid pad, which we still hold to this day. And this brings us to the last car which we made, our latest creation. Again, more of the aero, more pronounced, more of the bounding boxes filled with aero elements to force that air upwards. This photo was taken at the Faculty of Electrical Engineering, a rather fitting place for an electric car. And it's the last car that we made that we still test on for our latest, the DUT22. A car which doesn't exist yet except in the imaginations of the engineers sitting here and in a computer-aided design file, which we'll reveal to you shortly. But to explain a bit about how our team works, we are Formula Student Team Delft, which is the organization, and that's looked after by alumni in our strategic board and financial committee. But the team itself is run by a relatively new group of students every year. And so our team, as it looks exactly today, will only exist for this year, as some of the members might swap in and out. But of course, we started back in September. Now, before you begin the Formula Student year, you need to define a goal. And so for the months beforehand, the management team argued and debated to come up with this: to win FSG with the fastest and most consistent car built by one united team. Once we have a team goal, we know what we're here to do, and we can start figuring out exactly how to achieve that. So, in our team goal is one united team. The logic is, if you have one united team, we can build the fastest and most consistent car, and if we build the fastest and most consistent car, then we'll win FSG. But starting at the back with one united team, you do this before you have the car, of course. In order to get one united team, we eat dinner at our workshop, and we need to inspire this team of 90 students with a winning mentality and bind them together so that they can face the challenges awaiting them in the coming months. So in November of last year, we went off on a team weekend. This is the photo from our team weekend, where we basically competed all weekend long. We had a bunch of different events. The winners got prizes, the losers got nothing, and we got everyone to understand how important it is to win while bonding in the process, which is going to keep us together to actually be able to achieve our goals. As for the DUT22 so far, the team breakdown, we run as a team, but we look from a distance much like a company. We have 90 members, and so to make sure that everyone knows what to do when, we have a fairly clearly defined management structure. We have a management team with myself, the team manager. We have Sam, the chief engineer. We have a project manager who deals with the timing, making sure everyone knows when to do what. And then we have our finance and operations manager who ensures that we have the resources we need to accomplish our goals. Then we have the technical chiefs who look after each specific department of the car, whether it be the autonomous department, the aerodynamics department, or the chassis department. And then we have the engineers. These are the guys who actually sit behind their computer and figure out exactly what angle you want to be able to put this wing to go as fast as possible. In terms of the time that we spend, 63 of the 90 members are part-time members. On their contract, they're supposed to do 15 hours a week, but in our team we see most of them doing closer to 30. And apart from that, we have 27 full-time members who have taken a full year out of their study to commit to this goal. Within the full-timers, 12 of them are the core team, either technical chiefs or management team, and the remaining 15 are pure engineers. As for the future of DUT, just as the whole competition swapped over from combustion to electric in 2011, the new challenge for us is to introduce autonomous functionality to the car. Now, to do this, they have added an autonomous acceleration and skid pad event. They have not removed the manual acceleration or the manual skid pad. So manual skid pad, manual acceleration, endurance, and autocross will all still be done with a driver while having to do these events as well autonomously, which creates some interesting design challenges because, again, the driverless cup has invented in one form or another since 2018. But back then, you didn't have to worry about how the driver performed in the car because he was never going to drive it again once you attached the autonomous computer. So you didn't have to worry about weight or aerodynamics. You could just plug in the biggest thing that you could find. And this is the new challenge that we will be tackling and that no Delft team, at least, has tackled before us. So now we know the history of the competition. We see how it was created and why. We see the competition that we're going to be competing in, and we know the team that is tackling it. It's the moment that we've all been waiting for, the design reveal of the DUT22. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and a privilege to show this to you. Please enjoy our latest design.
I mean, wow, what an amazing car. Look at her. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed the review of the DUT22. I am Sam Pijnenburg, I'm the chief engineer of DUT22, and well, let's just say I'm very glad that you've been able to see this today. My purpose for being here is to take you through our design, what made our design in the beginning, what focuses that we have had, I should say, over the course of this design period to make this the fastest and most consistent car as per our team goal. I will also give you a bit of an idea of what it is like to create the magic and what sort of magic goes into our car actually driving. So let's kick it off. To give you an idea of where we start, the question that we need to answer is, what does it take to win? We want to win FSG? Great, but how do we do it? Turns out that this question sounds a lot simpler than it is to actually answer. And while that is absolutely no problem, it took a lot of deliberation on how we actually were going to get there at the start of the year. And actually still, throughout every single day of designing, you find yourself wondering this same question again. What does it actually take to win? And where should we go from here? But in the process of the design phase, we've actually found 3 key points that will define a car that is both fast and consistent. And those 3 key points are the following. Namely, the performance, the drivability, and the reliability of the car. Now, the performance may sound trivial, which arguably it is, but a car that is slow can never be driven fast. You can't extract performance out of a car if there's no performance inside of it. And that is true for both driverless and a driven car. At the same time, we need a car that is drivable, a car that has poor drivability, that is poorly balanced or hard to steer, hard to control, will never be able to actually be driven to the fullest potential by a driver or by a computer. Because if the car is unpredictable or the driver gets tired out at the end of an endurance event, it's going to cost us time, and a lot of it, meaning it costs us points and ultimately the competition. At the same time, lastly, but definitely not least, reliability. Reliability is something that we found to be very important. If you look throughout history, especially at FSG, you find that the competition scores approximately near the 95% mark of all points. This means that we need to score around about 950 points if we have an actual shot at winning. This means that actually we need to finish every single dynamic event if we want to have an actual shot at winning this competition. Thus, reliability is last, but definitely not least. So to give you a bit of an idea of how all these different points come into play in our car, I would like to get you along on a bit of a journey. So if you'll join me for the ride, then we're going to experience some true magic. Because imagine yourself being in the car, or the driver being in the car, and it lining up in front of the starting line of the acceleration event. So you're sitting inside the car, seeing 2 lines of cones in front of you, 75 meters long. And then it's a go, because the man in front of you waves the flag, and you know you're ready. So the driver inside the car presses the throttle pedal as hard as they can, making sure that the car accelerates with a full potential down the straight. But what happens? We press the pedal, and then what? So this is where our journey begins, in the pedal box. So here you can see the throttle and the brake pedal, which both combine to make our pedal box. But the tricky thing about this pedal box is that there's no clutch pedal. Since it's an electric car, we don't actually need a clutch pedal, we only need the brake and the throttle. Because since this car is electrically powered, we actually only need 1 gear to run in, and therefore a clutch is unnecessary. And that's great because it saves us weight, so that's extra performance. Now here you'll see actually the brake pedal on the left, on the right, and the throttle pedal on the left, because we're looking in reverse. So looking at the throttle pedal, you'll see 2 blue boxes at its base, which incorporate the throttle position sensors. And those throttle position sensors actually register the position of the throttle. So the driver presses down hard on the pedal, and those sensors will register that, which is great because we're going to need that data later. In the meantime, we also want to make sure that our driver is comfortable within the car. So fortunately, we have the ability to, within a matter of seconds, change the position of these pedals to accommodate each different driver in our team. Meaning that during the driver change in the middle of our endurance event, it's a matter of seconds for us to adjust the pedal box to accommodate the driver's needs and preferences. Now, the thing is, we have this data then from our driver pressing the throttle pedal. Where does it go? And how does it get there? And this is where the electronics department comes into play. And first of all, specifically, the wiring. Our data from those sensors travels through the wiring, which spreads all out the car, and actually forms the highway network of our car. It connects to every single electrical component you can possibly think of, including sensors and circuit boards and whatever else. And all this wiring, which stretches for more than 1 kilometer, will also ultimately provide us with a car that actually retrieves all the data from all the points that it needs to come from and goes everywhere where it needs to go. Then, with the driver now able to press our throttle pedal and the data actually being able to go anywhere we want it to go, where does it actually go? To a place called the VCU. The VCU, short for Vehicle Control Unit, is a self-developed PCB, printed circuit board, that controls basically everything about our car. It is, if you will, the brains of our car. It also runs something called the controls logic. And the controls logic is responsible for doing all the calculations to provide power to each of the motors in the most optimal way. To give you a bit of an idea, we have got our signal for the throttle coming in, and 4 motors that independently need to be actuated. So in order to do so optimally, with making sure that we actually use the tire grip that we have available at every given time, this VCU does a whole lot of complex computations to make sure that we send power to each of the wheels in the best configuration, such that at any time point, we receive maximum overall torque on the car and actually get maximum performance out of the car. At the same time, by the way, fun fact, this VCU also provides us with Wi-Fi and actually allows us to read out live telemetry, meaning that we can track everything the car is doing at any given point during testing and during the competitions, which is actually a great feature to have, because it allows us to spot issues right away that we can then quickly fix. Now, the controls logic then calculates exactly what torque needs to go to the motors. But unfortunately, the VCU itself isn't able to provide the power needed. So the data is instead sent to something called the motor controllers. And these motor controllers are something truly very special in our car. They are actually the combination of a whole lot of different disciplines and a whole lot of different people working together tirelessly to make these motor controllers work exceptionally well. The primary function of this piece of electronics is to provide power to the motors and also retrieve power from the motors and put it back into the battery. So the thing is, the battery is working on a DC power. And DC power is like you will find on a regular battery. It has a plus and a minus, and that's it. Now, this power somehow needs to be converted to alternating current, like you will find in your wall socket. And the issue in this is that it is quite a tedious process and rather hard to control. However, through a lot of effort and quite some years of development, we've actually been able to do this very well and very efficiently. So these motor controllers are not only able to supply our motors with the AC power that they need, but also retrieve that power, slowing the car down as a sort of braking, regenerative braking, and powering the accumulator, or charging the accumulator again. And actually, that gives us extra efficiency, more points. And here, especially in these motor controllers, reliability is of the utmost importance, as is performance, its efficiency. That's why we found a lot of points that we could invest in, and a lot of performance to be gained in these motor controllers that we're exploiting. To give you a bit of an idea of just how interesting these motor controllers are, we've got a bit of a comparison to the industry standard right over here. In the bottom left, you'll find our motor controllers compared to, in the top right, the motor controllers that form the industry standard for performance, high-performance vehicles. Now you see that, first of all, they are considerably smaller. They are also a lot lighter, and specifically a lot more efficient, which actually is quite incredible. Now that we know how to actually power our motors and actually turn electrical power from our battery into motion, we are going to have to do something with that motion, and actually going to have to convert that motion into powering our wheels. And the way we do that is through the following, namely the drivetrain, or the inner wheel. So we've built a transmission, which is, again, custom, designed and built, and it consists of several rather complex-looking elements to create one absolutely tiny gearbox. In fact, you'll find 4 on the car, 1 for each of the tires, 1 for each of the wheels, and each of these powered by its own motor. These actually fit inside our tires and will actually provide the most lightweight solution you can possibly think of. Now, the tricky thing with designing these drivetrain concepts is that while they are extremely light, which is great, they are also very small, so meaning all parts need to be small and designed very tightly. At the same time, we also need to make sure that it can actually withstand all the forces and do so reliably, because the cornering forces that we experience are rather high. Now, we've covered quite a lot of the journey already. We've actually had the driver press the throttle pedal, data being registered, sent to the VCU, controls logic figuring out exactly which of the 4 motors needs what amount of power, and then actually applying that power to the motor through the motor controllers into our drivetrain. And that's when one extremely important step is still missing. And that important step is black magic. Literally, the tires. Here we have one of our examples. And as you can see, it's also tiny, which is a good thing, because again, that means it's extremely light, much lighter than any other you'll find. And these tires have also been self-developed in cooperation with Vredestein. And they've been serving us very well. These tires, as far as we know, are definitely the smallest you will find at any Formula Student competition, and have an absolute ton of grip. So these tires are truly magical. Now, tire manufacturing in general is pretty magical, but this is truly astounding. So with these tires, we are actually able to put any torque that we put through our motors through the drivetrain onto the ground. Great, you think, we can accelerate. But no, because now you press the throttle pedal and, well, your tires race off. Unfortunate. So there's some steps missing in between. And one of those steps is the task of the suspension on our car. Now, the suspension system on our car, again, is quite tricky to figure out. And the reason for that is because our wheels are so small, there's very limited space to play with. So a lot of time goes into suspension, iterating with vehicle dynamics, the department also responsible for the controls logic, to actually make sure that everything fits and also performs optimally. And what do I mean by that? To perform optimally, we need the car's tires to be at exactly the right place at exactly the right time, be that at angles and also during bumps, cornering, steering, everything. If the tires are not at the optimal position that they can be, then there's no point and we can't extract maximum performance. So we need to make sure that we optimize this design and optimize all the attachment points for the suspension to make sure it works perfectly. Some other interesting features is that the suspension department actually probably actually provides the biggest amount of adjustability there is. And this will always add to extra drivability, because any driver would actually be able to have their own setup on the car and actually figure out what it is they prefer. That's great. Excellent. But there's another challenge. Because of our extremely high cornering forces, we also need to make sure that everything is actually structurally sound. If it's not structurally sound, we'll see the tires racing off the moment we turn into a corner. And unfortunately, that's no good. So you'll see the suspension department also working hard to run all the simulations necessary to find out if all parts are actually all in order and actually capable of handling all the incredible loads that we see. So now that we've attached our tire and our whole drivetrain to a suspension, we still need to attach our suspension to, well, a car. And what I mean by a car is actually the chassis. And this is the chassis. It's a carbon fiber monocoque. Carbon fiber because it's so extremely light. In fact, it is only 25 kilograms. And at that weight, if our knee gets better, my grandmother would be able to lift it. So the thing about the chassis, what makes it truly extraordinary, is that it's made out of, well, carbon, and yet able to resist extreme loads. It is able to resist impacts at 40 Gs from the rear, the front, and all the sides, while only weighing in at 25 kilograms. Moreover, it has to house the battery, the driver, and all sorts of other controls electronics that we can could ever put inside of it. It also needs to attach to the suspension, making sure that the wheels stay attached to, well, the car. So now at least we're complete. Now when we press the throttle pedal, the car will actually move. And it will move fast, believe me. And that's great. The car is light, the car is fast. We've got our throttle pedal connected to our VCU, making sure that we actually get all the performance out of it in the controls logic, then actually controlling the motors through our motor controllers, ultimately turning the drivetrain, turning the wheels, the suspension then driving the car forwards, and then the chassis actually moving forwards. But then we get to a corner. So this is where the fun stuff starts. We can press the brakes, that's fine, that works just the same. But the issue lies in, well, we want to be able to corner as fast as possible. And to be able to corner as fast as possible, we want, again, maximum grip out of our tires. And maximum grip out of our tires is the one thing that always contributes to our performance most. All the forces on our car need to go through the tires. So having tire grip available and more of it is absolutely crucial. Now the trick to doing so is something called aerodynamics. So our aerodynamics department works tirelessly to create something called downforce, which will actually add to our tire grip. To give you a bit of an idea, we create wing elements on our car that will actually push the air up as we drive through it, and in turn then pressing the car down into the ground and making sure that our wheels are firmly planted on the ground as well, adding to extra friction and thus tire grip. That's great. So now we have extra tire grip, and that means we can corner faster. That's great. It takes time off our laps, and that also means that we get extra points and thus a higher chance of winning. But here's the catch. It's quite hard to design aerodynamics in a way that actually makes sense. And usually when you design something, it tends to not immediately make sense. So that's why we do a whole lot of simulation. And the interesting things about the simulations that we've been able to do this year is that they are far more accurate than they've ever been before. So essentially what CFD, so flow simulation, does is generate pretty pictures. And these pretty pictures, as you'll see behind me, actually give us a lot of information about what the car is doing, and specifically what the airflow around the car is doing at any given time. So here you can see one of our cornering simulations that we've actually been able to properly implement this year through the extreme efforts of our engineers. And has already taught us a lot about how the car actually handles in more realistic cases and more realistic driving cases. Meaning that the performance we had on track will now actually be more close to the performance we expect due to these simulations. And that's great, because now we can further optimize our aerodynamics package for the actual on-track case, extra performance. Thus more points. Fantastic. But now there's a problem, always a problem. The problem is the following. In pushing the air up and pressing the car down, the extra elements that we add also contribute to something called drag. So now that our car is actually able to generate downforce, it is also harder to push it through the air. And that means that we have lower top speeds, but specifically less efficiency. Because all this effort that goes into driving the car through the air is ultimately energy that's lost and that we cannot retrieve from the motion of the car, and thus not recharge the battery with. And losing that efficiency, or losing that energy, losing efficiency, is going to cost us points. So, naturally we found a true engineering solution. Simply what we do is we open some of the elements on the rear wing, called DRS. You may know it from Formula 1, the drag reduction system. And essentially what happens is that the two upper elements of the rear wing open up, letting more air through, sort of lifting the car, reducing the downforce of our car, but also reducing the drag of our car, meaning that we don't have to push it through as hard. And that system looks something like this when it's in motion. And you can see the two rear elements moving. So now we've got a car that's driving, and it's driving fast around the corner as well as on the straights. But what if there's no driver? Because now we are suddenly met with two extra events that we have to deal with. How are we going to ever deal with not having a driver in our car? And it turns out that there's some key issues that we then can actually identify. Starting with the first, which is not being able to see. A driver is able to see around him, but the car can't, at least not right off the bat. So we mount a sensor on the car, called the LiDAR, which shoots out infrared rays all around it. And from those infrared rays, a lot of them are reflected back into the sensor, and then the sensor gets a feel for how far certain parts, certain items, points of space are away. It gets a sense of what is around it. Now the trick is then to use a lot of clever mathematics and software to deduce where certain cones are in space. This is no easy task, but definitely something that our engineers have been able to figure out rather fast. So what we've been doing is we've been running around our LiDAR on a handcart. So some of our engineers have been working out. And they've been running skid pad tracks for ages, trying to get data of skid pad tracks and actually seeing if the LiDAR and the software that they've produced would be able to detect cones. And, well, as it turns out, it's definitely possible. So here you can see the handcart driving around the skid pad and all sorts of blue dots lighting up, which are the cones. And you can also see that the skid pad track is even somewhat recognizable. So great, we can now actually detect cones and see where we're going. The next step, the next problem, is that now we have to actually build a track out of this. And not only build a track out of this, but also actually see what the fastest path is through the track, and then have the car drive itself, have it control the steering, the brakes, and the throttle. So in doing that, we find that we have a challenge. We cannot actually test this on the car, because there's no car yet. So instead, what we've decided to do is build a simulator, naturally, as one does. And this simulator will allow us to run all the software before the car even exists, and sort of figure out all the physics that we actually will want to have on the car, and all the controls that we will want to have on the car, exactly in such a way to make it drive the fastest possible. In fact, we've had the simulator run against physical drivers, actually drivers from previous years, like the one you saw in the video from just now before at the autocross in Austria that Anton showed you before. And actually, they were beaten by at least a tenth of a second or over. So the computer is already pretty fast. Now, to show you how that looks like, I've got a bit of a video for you again. This is the car actually running, if it works, the car actually running the skid pad. And you can already see that some of the cones have cylinders on them. And those cylinders actually are cylinders that the LiDAR has then already perceived. You can see that there's also lines that the car is actually drawing by itself to indicate the circles of the skid pad track, its limits, and in green, a track that it's actually driving. You can see that also its second lap is much faster than its first, because it already knows the track and is actually able to accelerate much faster. Same happens for the left-hand side. Again, the second lap being much faster than the first. So now that we're not only able to see the track, but also actually create the controls that we need to drive the car around the track, we're golden. Well, we still have to build the car and test the software and do all the other stuff, but at least the simulator works, so that's great. Now that our car is actually able to not only drive, but also drive itself, and in every single event that we could possibly think of, I still want to share some stats with you, and some things that you will find undoubtedly quite impressive. So we've run some calculations together with the vehicle dynamics department, as one does, because they are in charge of all the numbers on our car. And we found some fun numbers for you. So first of all, our car would be able to accelerate to 100 kilometers an hour from standstill in 1.86 seconds. Quite impressive. But even more impressive is that in driverless mode, our car will be able to do the exact same feat in only 1.55 seconds. Yes. Quite incredible. Now, our car also is quite powerful. It provides 1,257 Newton meters of torque. And to give you a bit of a reference for this, a Formula 1 car produces around 800 in its current era. So the V6 hybrid engines produce around 800 Newton meters of torque. Well under our number. Now you also get a sense of why it is so important that we design our drivetrain so well, because these numbers are ridiculously high. Now some other interesting numbers. We can pull 3.3 Gs under braking. Well, I mean, brace for impact. And actually, it is possible, at least theoretically, to drive the car upside down at 111 kilometers an hour. We are still in arguments as to whether or not we actually want to try this. And we've already found some interested sponsors to help us build tracks to be able to actually test it. So, well, actually, it's not entirely unlikely that we'll try at some point in the future. Definitely now that the car can do it all by itself. It's quite remarkable, isn't it? Now, furthermore, lastly, the car weighs in at 158.6 kilograms in total, which is really an incredibly low figure. Only 160 kilograms, not even. And all of this is to create this car, the DUT22. And this car really has been built then with reliability, with drivability, and with performance in mind, and tried to find the optimum between the three. This car really has been built to do only one thing, and that thing is to win FSG. And as to why we want to win, I think no other than Anton Deken should be joining me on stage to explain to you why that is.
Thanks very much, Sam. now that we've seen all of the intricacies behind the design of this car, and you might be sitting at home thinking to yourself, that seems pretty complicated. It's because it is. It's a complicated task. And we have a team of 90 engineers whose predominant preoccupation for the next year is going to be thinking about this car and how to get the whole team to win. And I think it's a fair question. It might go without saying, obviously you want to win, but I think it's worth asking why. Why is it worth putting this much effort, making this many sacrifices to achieve this goal? Well, just as in 1980, they started the competition in order to make engineering students better engineers by the time they left, mainly by giving them practical experience with a real event. That competition has now gone from having 4 competing teams to having 800 teams from 600 universities competing from all over the world, from Japan to Thailand to India to the United States to Brazil. There are teams competing in this event. Out of all of those events, Formula Student Germany is the most competitive one. We know it's the most competitive because on the events where it's the same no matter where you go in the world, such as acceleration and skid pad, the cars at Formula Student Germany do it the fastest. So our goal is to win the most competitive event in the largest student engineering design competition in the world. Because we are engineering students at this stage. We have gone our whole life being able to theoretically say, if I built a race car, it would be the fastest race car in the world because of this. You can give us 3 numbers, we'll give you the 4th. And we get really good at this. We say that we can build a bridge that will stay upright. We say all of these things, but we don't actually know until we've done it. And when you look at the alumni from teams within this competition, especially teams which have successfully won, the biggest difference between them and students who have never competed in this competition, and especially students who have never won this competition, is confidence, which is a critical part. It's the most important parameter behind actually having practical experience. That's what you gain by getting the practical experience. Now, in terms of maximizing confidence, if we can win this competition, we will not just know that we can design and build and deliver a race car that competes at a competition, but we'll know that we can do it better than any other engineering student in the whole world, and we'll know exactly how capable we are. Now we're halfway there. We have the design. And over the next 5 months, we're going to be creating it. So the next time I see those of you watching this via YouTube stream will be at the rollout of the DUT22 when we show you the physical product which we will be taking to the competitions this coming summer. Until then, stay attached to our social media and stay on board with our journey as we endeavor to win FSG with the fastest and most consistent car built by one united team. Ahoo! Thanks, guys.
All right, that's it. We done it.